A timid waitress, so afraid of speaking she couldn't even say her own name, ends up inspiring a famous poet to write a poem just for her because she spilled coffee on his shirt. When an apology becomes a poem and fear transforms into a voice, can a heart that's always been silent find the courage to speak of love? It all began with a coffee stain. The morning drifted by slowly, just as it always did at Elliot's Corner, a small cafe tucked beneath a row of springtime maples where the sunlight didn't pour but trickled down in pale golden ribbons across the wooden tables. The shop had only been open for 15 minutes. Everything was still and hushed, just the way Mia liked it. She loved this moment before the place filled with voices. When the only sounds were the soft hiss of the espresso machine, steady as a heartbeat, and the scent of coffee seemed to hold its breath in the air. The empty tables looked as if they were waiting, quietly, patiently, for someone to come and tell a story. Mia didn't talk much. She never knew what to say when there were too many people around. She had a voice, but feared it would come out at the wrong time, in the wrong tone, in the wrong way. The other servers could chat with customers, make jokes while handing over the menu. Mia only knew how to bow her head, smile politely, and retreat as quickly as possible. That morning she chose the section by the window, fewer customers, softer light. She didn't know yet that this morning would be different. He walked in at 8:07. The bell on the door chimed softly, but Mia didn't look up. Not until she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and a man's voice, deep and rough like a cold morning. "Just a mocha, please." She nodded, barely glancing his way. That voice wasn't hurried, wasn't harsh. It had a certain hush to it, like wind brushing the surface of a lake, so gentle you only noticed when the water stirred. She wrote down the order and went to the machine. Outside, the man chose the table in the corner by the window, beside a small cactus blooming with orange flowers. He placed a worn leather bag on the chair next to him and pulled out a notebook, not a laptop, not a phone. A dark, leather-bound notebook with scuffed edges. A writer, Mia thought. When she returned, mocha in hand, she walked with careful, deliberate steps, as if each one had to pass a silent test. But something unexpected happened. The edge of a nearby tablecloth had been tugged loose and her heel caught on it just slightly. The cup tilted. Hot coffee spilled over the rim, splashing onto her hand, and then down onto the white shirt of the man at the table. The cafe froze for a heartbeat. Mia stood still, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Her face burned. For the first time, she looked him in the eye, grey, wide with surprise, then quickly bowed her head. I'm so sorry, she stammered. He stood, stepping back a little, shirt soaked at the chest. But he didn't yell, didn't frown, didn't say anything harsh. He just looked at her for a long time, then he smiled, just enough to soften the air between them. "It's okay," he said. Mia remained frozen, hands clenched around the cloth in her apron pocket. When he returned to his seat, she stepped back behind the counter, almost hiding. She couldn't believe she'd spilled the coffee. She could feel the eyes of the other customers, not judging, but noticing. And for Mia, that alone was enough to make her wish she could disappear. 10 minutes passed. She made another mocha, this time with extra care. She added a small butter cookie on the side, a quiet offering from the kitchen. But the most important thing she saved for last, a napkin. On it, in neat handwriting, she had written, "I'm terribly sorry for earlier. I was too clumsy." Here's a quote that always comforts me. "Be gentle with yourself. You're doing the best you can." Below it, she drew a small heart. Childish, awkward, but sincere. She returned to the table and set everything down. The mocha, the cookie, and finally the note. She said nothing, didn't meet his eyes, then turned and walked away as quickly as when he'd first entered the cafe. Jake. That was his name. Looked up at the sound of the cup being placed down. When he saw the napkin, he blinked, surprised. His eyes scanned the words and then something curious happened. He smiled, not just at the sweetness of the note, but at the vulnerability trembling in each line of handwriting. People usually apologize with words, but this girl had apologized with her heart, wrapped in a quote, a little drawing, and a silence so tender it almost hurt. Jake folded the napkin and tucked it into his notebook. Then, using the fountain pen he always carried, he began writing something on a separate scrap of paper. Mia couldn't see what it was, but from behind the counter, she stole a glance, just enough to notice the way his shoulders moved slightly. As he wrote, she didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd come back tomorrow, but for the first time in a long while, Mia smiled, a small, genuine smile. Maybe. Not every mistake leads to an ending. Sometimes it begins something, else quiet and gentle, like the first light of morning. The next morning, Elliot's Corner opened right on time, as always. The sun rose slowly through the maple canopy, casting soft light across the wooden floor. Mia stepped in through the back door, her white blouse freshly pressed, her hair tied up more neatly than usual. A small sign, but a clear one. She'd taken more time getting ready today. She wouldn't call it waiting for him, but each time she passed the corner table by the window, her eyes flicked toward it. It remained empty. The little cactus was still there, blooming quietly beside the empty chair. The shift began with the usual cappuccino orders. Mia stayed busy, but her heart was restless. She told herself, maybe yesterday was a fluke. Maybe he's not a coffee person. Maybe that shirt never recovered from the stain. She was bent over, wiping a table, when the doorbell chimed, that familiar stride, the long ash-gray coat, the worn leather notebook, and a smile, easy and unbroken, as if no interruption had ever passed between them. Jake. He walked straight to the same table, not bothering to scan for a seat. Mia paused for a beat, then turned quickly toward the counter, her heart thudding. Like a spoon clinking against porcelain, she didn't rush over. She checked the machine, wiped the mocha cup again, even though no one was looking. This time, she wanted everything to be perfect. No spilling, no trembling hands, no fumbling. When she finally walked over and set the cup down, she still couldn't meet his gaze. But he was already looking at her, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Thanks," he said, in that same low, husky voice, now softened by a warm smile. This time, no flood. Mia froze, her face flushed hot. But instead of shrinking, she laughed, short, quiet, the kind that slips out after rain has passed. Jake said nothing else. He simply nudged a folded napkin toward her, the ink already bleeding faintly through the back. Mia picked it up instinctively, then scurried back behind the counter. It took a few seconds before she dared to unfold it. The handwriting was slanted, gentle, precise. A short poem unfurled across the paper. No harm in the spill, no curse in the brew, just a shy little storm in a waitress's view. The mocha was hot, my shirt paid the toll, but your note, dear lady, was warmth for my soul's. Mia bit her lip. She wasn't sure if her face was burning from embarrassment or something else entirely. No one had ever written a poem about her before. No one had ever called her dear lady. Beneath the poem was a handwritten line, not rhymed, but lovely. Next time, if you're not too shy, I'd love a name to rhyme with. She almost sighed aloud. Someone was playing with language, not to show off, but to draw her in. Gently, subtly. She hadn't planned to respond, but then she picked up a pen and scribbled a short line on the back of the napkin. It's Mia, short, simple. Not very poetic, I know. She folded it, placed it on the table while he wasn't looking, and slipped away like before. He opened it, read it, nodded slightly, his expression unchanged, but the corners of his mouth lifting with unmistakable delight. He wrote something. Left it behind. She passed by, picked it up, this time just a single sentence. Mia, like a soft breeze, on one syllable, 1,000 poems. She laughed again. And as her laughter faded into the warm air, she realized this was the first time in months her heart didn't feel heavy in her chest. No one in the cafe noticed the quiet exchange of ink and paper between the two of them. No conversation, no lingering glances, No clear signs of anything at all. Only napkins. An unspoken dialogue between a girl who didn't like to talk and a man who lived in words. Before leaving, Jake slipped another napkin beneath his cookie plate. When Mia opened it, another small poem was waiting, shorter this time, like a goodbye. I came for mocha, stayed for your note, left with a smile and a heart afloat. And beneath it, same time tomorrow? She didn't answer. But the next morning, Mia arrived 15 minutes earlier than usual, and the table by the window was still empty. Not yet. On the third morning, the corner table by the window had become a quiet rhythm of the cafe, like it had never belonged to anyone but Jake, and no one but Mia had the patience to serve it without disturbing the breath of light spilling through the trees. Jake arrived earlier than the day before. On the table sat a mocha, already waiting. No need for an order, no need to ask. He smiled when he saw it steaming just right. No words were spoken, none were needed. But a folded napkin slid across the table toward Mia. This one, a pale cream, the more expensive kind, usually reserved for special guests. Favorite book? Men don't say too many to choose from. That's cheating? Mia bit her lip, thinking long and hard. Then wrote, The Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath. I don't know why. Maybe because it's the only one I ever finished. Twice, Jake read it, nodded, wrote back, Good choice, dark but honest, like strong coffee. He added another line as if it slipped out without thinking. And music. Mia hesitated, thought of naming an indie band, something safe, but instead she wrote slowly, Old jazz, Billie Holiday, especially when it rains. Jake raised his eyebrows when he read that. He didn't write anything this time. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and set down an AirPod with a note. Try this, Autumn in New York. You'll feel like you're in a black and white movie. Mia smiled softly. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to choose the right words. She just had to be herself, with all the quiet little things that made her her. The napkins kept passing between them. They spoke about films they'd seen, places they'd never been. Jake had once wandered through Prague. Mia had never left her state. He told her about writing poems on napkins in airport terminals. She told him how she once wanted to learn to draw but gave up, afraid she could never get it just right. Then came a napkin that looked like any other, yet made Mia stop breathing. What's your dream? It seemed like a simple question, but as she read it, her hands went cold. She picked up the pen but couldn't write. She tried a bullet point, then crossed it out, then tried again, then erased. At last, she wrote, I don't really know. I guess, just to feel less scared all the time. She folded the napkin and passed it back, her heart clenched tight. Jake opened it, read slowly. No smile, no reply. He didn't write anything right away. He just rested his hand on the paper, as if leaving behind a silence filled with understanding. For the first time, there was no poem, no joke, just truth, bare, trembling, like fear that hadn't quite learned its own name. Mia sat behind the counter, still as she wasn't sure he would keep writing, wasn't sure if she'd broken the spell. But then another napkin appeared on the table. That's brave, Mia. Most people fake a dream. You just told me the truth. She'd read it again and again. Kant felt something loosen in her chest, like gentle rain falling on a quiet street, not loud but enough to soak the day through. Before Jake left, he added one more line. Still, I think there's a story inside you. Maybe even a whole book, and beneath that a short poem. Words don't shout from brave hearts, they whisper, and those whispers move mountains. Jake stood and gave her a small nod goodbye. Mia responded, not with words, but with a smile. Her first, from behind the counter where she had always hidden. The table was empty again. But the last napkin remained, resting like a note, passed between two souls who had found a shared language, in the quiet things no one needed to say aloud. On a foggy Thursday morning, the sky hung low, as if the clouds had decided to linger close to the ground. Elliot's corner glowed with warm golden light against the damp chill outside, like a comforting hand in the greyness of the season. Mia arrived earlier than usual. In her hands was a small velvet-covered notebook, old but still soft to the touch. She hadn't meant to bring it, but somehow this morning she'd slipped it into her bag without thinking. Jake walked in at 8:09, slightly later than his usual, but with a clearer, brighter smile than the days before. He didn't carry his bag today. Just his notebook, a fountain pen and a single white daisy, which he set gently on the table in front of him. Mia noticed the flower first and blushed, not because he had brought it for her, but because it said something quietly in a language with no words, yet one she understood perfectly. He wrote the first note, "Cloudy morning today. Maybe we need a little more poetry to stay warm." She smiled, nodded, pulled a pen from the pocket of her apron and replied, "As long as the poetry's not too sweet. I'm prone to cavities." Jake laughed aloud for the first time. A soft husky sound that turned a few heads from nearby tables, but he didn't mind. He wrote again, sliding the paper toward her with a half-teasing, half-serious glance. "Mia, the girl who loves jazz, reads Plath, and hides behind downcast eyes. I wonder if you're hiding a novel in your heart." Mia paused, her cheeks. "Coloring?" She didn't know how to answer, but then she reached into her bag and placed the velvet notebook on the table. She didn't open it, just set it there, a silent gesture of trust. Jake tilted his head, curious. "Since when?" He wrote. She replied, "8th grade, first letters to myself and then poems and then short stories." Jake nodded gently, not prying further. He wrote, "May I read a piece?" Mia didn't answer at first. She stared at the eye. A notebook as though it might resist, then slowly shook her head. No one's ever read it before. Jake didn't push. He simply turned over the napkin and wrote on the back, a quote she had once shared with him, back when all this began. "The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt." Sylvia Plath below it in his own hand. "But you don't need to show anyone. You only need to believe that you can write." Mia lowered her head. Then, after a moment, she opened the notebook, carefully tore out a page, her hands trembling, and placed it in front of him. Jake didn't rush. He lifted the paper as if it held a sealed piece of time. Then he read, eyes moving slowly, lips pressed together, his brow furrowing with emotion. He set the paper down. "Mia." She looked up. "You're writing. It's not just word. It has breath, like the way you walk, soft but unforgettable." She laughed shyly. Jake continued, this time not on paper, but with his voice, low, steady, sincere. "There's a poetry reading next week at the neighborhood library. Just a small gathering, and you should read something of yours." The suggestion struck her like a chime in the chest, soft, but enough to send a tremble through her whole body. "Me? No. I've never read out loud. Not in front of people. I'll stutter. My voice will crack, or I'll forget the words." Jake smiled. His eyes weren't teasing, just quiet and kind. "You don't have to be perfect. Just real. Your poem is real. And someone needs to hear that." Mia was silent. Her fingers clutched the edge of her apron. She looked out the window. Rain had started to fall, the first drops blurring the glass. "I'm scared," she whispered, soft as wind slipping through a door. Jake wrote one final line. "Everyone's scared." But poetry exists because of fear, and the will to speak anyway. She didn't write back. But when Jake stood to leave, she didn't tear up the note like the others. She folded it carefully like something precious and tucked it inside, the velvet notebook. And for the first time she thought, maybe, just maybe, her voice would be heard, not because it was loud, but because it was true. The weekend arrived faster than Mia expected. The poetry night flyer had been pinned to the community library's bulletin board, a plain white sheet bordered in pale blue, the event's title handwritten in black ink, "Whispers of the Soul, Poetry Night, 7 p.m., Friday." Mia stared at it while waiting in line to borrow a book, her heart thudding slow and heavy. The words of others would echo there. But what would it sound like if it were her voice? On Tuesday, when Jake settled into his usual seat, Mia brought over his mocha, but this time there was no napkin. She bowed her head a little longer than usual, never meeting his eyes. He understood. When she turned away, Jake quietly set a slip of paper beside the cup. "That poem, you'll read it, won't you?" No reply came. Mia disappeared behind the counter, pretending to fuss with a coffee machine that worked just fine. Half an hour later, after he had left, she returned to the table and found another note, this one longer. "There was a time I stood in front of my class to read the first poem I ever wrote." A blonde girl giggled. "I stopped reading and went home and tore up the whole notebook, and it took me 3 years to write again. Writing isn't always brave, but reading, it's forgiveness. For fear, you don't have to read it perfectly. Just don't forget yourself." That night, Mia turned back to an old poem, the very first she had written when she was 15. It was simple, a little clumsy, but achingly honest. And beneath the final line in her younger, uneven handwriting, it read, "I'll never let anyone read this." She remembered her teacher's eyes back then, tender but helpless, while the other kids snickered. A voice echoed in her memory, now sharp as a tack, old but still pointed. "That poem put me to sleep. So boring." What even was that? That memory was like a tiny needle, small but deep. She didn't cry, but her shoulders folded in, the way they had that day, standing in front of a room that made her wish she could disappear. The next morning, Mia left a note for Jake on the table. It said only 2 words. "I'm sorry." Jake didn't reply. With a napkin, he spoke for the first time out loud. "If you don't want to, I won't ask again. But don't let someone's old laughter steal your real voice." His voice was quiet even, no pressure. But his eyes were so honest it nearly made her cry. On Thursday, Mia wrote a single line on a napkin. She slipped it into her apron, pocket never handing it over. "If my hands shake holding the mic, will you be there just looking at me?" The question never left her pocket, but in her mind, Jake had already answered. "I'll be in the front row, watching you, and if you forget the word, I'll close my eyes and still listen." That evening, Mia sat in her small rented room, the soft yellow light spilling through white curtains. On her desk, her old notebook lay open to the poem she had chosen. Her hands trembled, but she didn't close it. She was trying, even with her heart full of fear. Finally, she picked up her pen and wrote one last line at the bottom of the page. "If I don't say it out loud, who will know that this sorrow once had wings?" She closed the notebook and fell asleep with her hand still resting on the pen's cap. Friday night. The moon hung thin as a lemon slice in the sky above the city. The streets shimmered with headlights, but inside the small community library at the end of Elm Street, the lights were softer, golden and warm, like an open palm, ready to hold fragile hearts. A handwritten sign hung at the door. "Whispers of the Soul, Poetry Night and Unspoken Words." Mia stood behind the sheer curtain that hid the small stage. In her hands was her old blue notebook, clenched so tightly its corners had begun to curl. Her fingers trembled, her legs wobbled, her stomach felt hollow. The room wasn't large, maybe 30 people, but to Mia it felt like 30 amplifications of fear. Every glance, every ear, every possible furrowed brow if someone didn't understand her poem, every half smile if her voice shook. It all spun through, her mind like a storm. A voice called gently from backstage. "Mia, you're next." She didn't respond. In the second row, Jake sat with his hands folded over his knees, eyes fixed on the curtain. He knew she would panic. He also knew she might turn and walk away. But he believed, if she could pass through this moment, she would never again see herself as small. Mia looked down at her pale hands clutching the notebook. Then she noticed something tucked in the pocket of her shirt, a tiny folded note. Jake had given it to her yesterday. She hadn't dared open it. Now she did. A poem, just 4 lines. "If your voice shakes, let it." Some truths were never meant to be sung with certainty. She read it again and again. Her eyes stung, not sure if from tears or the soft stage lights blurring her vision. The announcer's voice came through the mic. "Our next reader is new to our stage, but surely not for the last time. Please welcome Mia." As she Stepped onto the stage, she barely heard the applause. Everything felt dreamlike, gauzy. She stood there, small, facing a room full of strangers and a microphone waiting in silence. Nothing. A long pause. Someone coughed gently in the audience. A few people glanced at one another. Jake didn't move. He only smiled. A smile full of belief, not pressure. Mia opened her notebook. Her hands still shook. Her voice, when she began, was barely a whisper. There are mornings when I wake with a heart that's still asleep. Her voice cracked but didn't stop. She paused, breathed. Heard herself echo in the speaker, a bit off-key but real, and no one laughed. No one coughed, no one looked away. She continued. I don't know how to tell the world that I'm still trying. Something shifted in her tone. Like a bowstring pulled taut, now released. She kept reading, eyes on the page, but her voice grew steadier, fuller. If I tremble, please don't mistake it for weakness. It's just the way I protect what's fragile. She stopped at the final line and looked up. The room was utterly still, a long suspended moment. No movement, no buzzing phones, not even a whisper. Then a single clap, then another, then the whole room. Not thunderous, but warm, not demanding, but welcoming. Mia stood there. She didn't bow just yet. She looked toward Jake. He nodded. His eyes shone under the lights. His lips moved silently. You did it. And for the first time in her life, Mia didn't feel like the quiet shadow behind the coffee counter. She was a voice now, trembling, yes, but real enough to reach someone. She stepped down from the stage, still shaking, but with something new in her chest, confidence, lightness, and the feeling of finally being heard. The sound of applause still echoed in Mia's ears, even as she stepped down from the stage. She didn't rush, didn't flee the spotlight as she might have once. Her steps were slow, trembling, but no longer out of fear. This time, she was feeling something entirely new, what it meant to be heard. In over 20 years of life, Mia had never imagined what that might feel like. To be met with complete silence, not from indifference, but attention. A room that quieted itself just to catch her voice, a whisper, a wavering sentence, and instead of being drowned out, it was received like something essential. When she sat down in the empty seat beside Jake, her hands were still cold, her gaze still lowered. But Jake leaned slightly toward her, his voice low and warm. Did you hear it? She looked at him, puzzled. He nodded toward the audience. The clapping had quieted, but the air still hummed with something soft and resonant. The sound of people's hearts, he said. When someone touches them. Mia let out a small laugh, not shy, not self-conscious, just honest. I thought they'd not understand. Jake shook his head. They don't need to understand every word. They just need to feel that you meant them. Mia turned back toward the stage. A middle-aged man was now reading a poem about his late mother. She didn't catch every line, but each syllable seemed to slow the rhythm of her heart. Not because it was more beautiful, but because she was listening differently now, not as a spectator, but as someone within. She was sitting here, among a quiet community. A group of people with old wounds, half-written lines they'd never dared to say aloud. And tonight they were sharing those things with one another. No matter their jobs, backgrounds, or recognition, only truth mattered. Jake leaned in, again, this time speaking the words that Mia would carry with her forever. You know, I used to think poetry was something we write to heal ourselves. But tonight, because of you, I realized it can heal others too. Mia turned to him. Her eyes shimmered, full but holding. No tears fell. I only write because if I don't, I feel like I disappear. Jake nodded, steady. And tonight you gave this whole room a reason to stay. That wasn't praise. It wasn't encouragement. It was simply true. And it made something inside Mia open. Quietly. Like a window cracked on a summer morning. Not loud, not dramatic, but just wide enough to let in a full, deep breath. After the event, people left as quietly as they'd come. Mia stood near the door of the library, her small notebook still tucked against her chest. An older woman paused, gently touching her shoulder. Thank you, dear. Your poem. It was like you were speaking for my granddaughter. Mia bowed her head, unsure how to respond. But inside her something was growing, slowly, warmly, not pride, something deeper, a kind of awakening. She had spent years believing she didn't have a voice, but that had never been true. She had simply never dared to speak it aloud. That night, a soft breeze whispered through the quiet streets. The city, gentled by rain, glistened under the glow of street lamps, everything wrapped in a hush that felt almost sacred. Footsteps slowed, voices softened, and the last lights of the community library blinked out, closing the chapter on a night filled with poetry and everything unspoken. Mia and Jake didn't head home right away. They walked side by side, slowly, down the street toward Elliot's corner, its windows still lit. Not for work, not for orders. Tonight, it was just a familiar place, the place where their story had begun. In front of the cafe sat an old wooden bench. Where a menu board usually stood in the mornings, now there were only two people. One who had learned to write with her whole heart, and one who had helped her find her voice. Mia sat first. Jake followed. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Silence had long ceased to be uncomfortable between them. It had become part of their language. The breeze slipped past, as soft as the moment Mia had stepped onto the stage. She leaned gently against the bench's back, eyes tilted toward the sky. The moon wasn't fulgent, but it was real. Jake turned toward her. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at her, like every poem he had ever written would, still fall short of capturing the way she looked in this moment. Then, in a voice quiet enough to protect the wind, he asked, "Mia, do you know what you did tonight?" She tilted her head. "What? You gave people a reason to believe in the things they've kept hidden. You made fear feel touchable, with words." Mia smiled. "I'm still scared, you know." Jake laughed softly. "Scared, but you did it anyway. That's courage." She was quiet, then turned to him. "Jake, thank you for not pushing, for staying, for believing in me, even when I didn't." He looked at her, nodded slowly. "I don't need you to become anything. I just don't want you to forget. Your voice, however soft, is still a voice." She smiled, her eyes catching the moonlight with something fragile as silk and sharp as a pen gliding over paper. Jake reached out and touched her hand where it rested on the bench, not to hold it, just to touch it. A gesture that said, "I'm here if you want me to be." Mia's fingers curled. She didn't pull away. She turned fully toward him, eyes meeting his. Neither spoke. The wind paused. Then Jake leaned in very gently, like he didn't want to disturb the moment. His lips touched hers. It wasn't the kind of kiss born from urgency. It was a kiss of knowing, of finding, of two people who had lived in silence for too long and had finally heard each other. It didn't last long. It didn't need to, like rain at night. It didn't soak through but stayed with you quietly for miles. When they pulled apart, Mia said nothing, but her eyes were different, more certain, more open, and fuller, like she'd just turned a final page and was ready to begin a new chapter. Jake murmured, voice like a last line of verse. "For all the poems you haven't written yet, and the dreams we'll tell together." Mia nodded. "No rush, we have time." They sat there on the old bench outside the cafe, beneath a moon that didn't need to be full, beside a city that had finally gone still. Just two people who found each other through a spilled cup of coffee, a handwritten note, and 100 things never said out loud. Thank you for listening to this little story, a story where a single apology opened the door to healing, to connection, to the power of a voice once afraid to be heard. And if this story touched you, hold on to that. Truth, sometimes the truest things come in the softest, most trembling voice, and that voice is always worth hearing.